Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our TV show EU Deal After Brexit. We are here today with Eleonore in order to talk about the consequences of Brexit on merger control. Indeed, after what can be called a long journey, Brexit has finally happened. But before going deep into the subject, let's just recall that merger control is a process through which mergers are reviewed in order to avoid any anti-competitive consequences. Within the EU, we have two types of mergers, the national ones and the cross-border ones, which are the mergers, for example, between a UK company and a French company. Now, without further ado, let's assess with you, Eleonore, what are the possible outcomes of this transitional period.
So first, thank you, Audrey, for having me here today. We could have two possible outcomes. Either the UK remains an EEA member or enters the EFTA as an independent member, depending on the content of the agreement. So on the one hand, if the UK does not withdraw from the EEA community, the European Economic Area, it means it still benefits from the single market without the need for further bilateral agreements. On the other hand, if the UK withdraws from the EEA but still wishes to be included within the single market, it would follow the Swiss model. So Switzerland, as we just to recall, has ratified the EFTA Convention in 1960 and then has agreed to a series of bilateral agreements with the European Union in order to access the single market.
So is there any provision in the treaties that could help us foresee the future UK's regime?
Well, regarding the EFTA, no, unfortunately, there is no provision on merger control specifically. The current distinction operated by the merger regulation, the European regulation, concerning the community dimension would still apply. The EU Commission would review mergers when the entities have a community dimension, whereas the CMA, the British authority, would apply its national rules comprised in the Enterprise Act. As for the EEA, the EFTA Surveillance Authority would review mergers if there is a community dimension, but with an additional criterion, which is the center of gravity. The entities, the merging entities, would have their center of gravity within the non-European EEA state. However, this authority, unlike the Commission, does not have an exclusive competence.
Okay, so as I can understand, both of those models would re-establish a double jurisdiction, which means that the Commission would review the mergers, but also the national authority. So this would put an end to the famous one-stop shop approach, which was a very famous system of cooperation, following which only the European Commission was reviewing certain merger. So I assume this would have effects also for the UK CMA?
Well, yes. Let's say the CMA's controls would have the same objective as the Commission, but their methods would probably differ. First, the British Enterprise Act allows the CMA to carry out merger controls since 2014, so it is very recent. Since then, the CMA has reviewed 56 cases, 46% of which involved serious competition problems. The difference with the Commission is the investigation's time period. First, well, the CMA doesn't have to specify the time period when it starts an investigation, so the merging entities have no possibility to know how long it's going to take, the investigation is going to take. And furthermore, the wording in the two texts differ. The Enterprise Act mentions enterprises, whereas the European Treaty, the European regulation mentions undertakings. So we could assume that the text would not be applicable to the same entities, the same companies, and so the two authorities would not review the same operations.
Okay, so to sum up, the main problem remains the re-establishment of the double the double assessment. And so this would increase the burden of administrative burden of the companies.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Eleonore, for being with us today, and thank you for watching. See you in the next one.